All right, we're in main electrical room, 140, and we're going to be going over the main distribution for this project. Right now we are at electrical switchgear HA, which HA's primary function is it controls all the power over in the north tower. It has two breakers, HDP2 and HDP1. These two breakers, primarily all this does is feed the north tower. This here is your main breaker. This comes directly from the transformer outside Duke Energy transformer. That's all this one does. All right, so this is the main breaker for HC. This is being fed from the Duke Energy transformer. Main power comes into here. It buses with bus ties together down to these breakers here. ATS3, you'll have the cables coming off of ATS3 going directly to the ATS. Then you'll have ATS2, same as well, going right to ATS2. HDP, the cables from HDP don't go to the ATS, they bypass that and they go straight to the distribution panel. So in an emergency situation, HDP will be dead. But ATS2 and ATS3, when they drop out, the generator will kick on, power transfer over, and it'll distribute the power out to them areas. This comes from the transformer. If we lose power, then everything in here is dead. But once we lose power, the generator will come on because ATS and ATS2 is going to cause the generator to start up. It's going to cause it to transfer and start up and send power back out. All right, this is VOA. VOA's primary function is 277 480 volt power in the south tower. This primarily does all your lighting, mechanical, anything like that in the south tower that requires a higher voltage. Also in this panel, you have ATS1. ATS1 is going to feed all your emergency lighting, receptacles, anything in that matter in the south tower. Then you have DPVOA. DPVOA is all your 277 40 volt panels in the south tower, which that's going to feed. And then you have your main breaker here. So if you do have a power loss here as well, you would lose your DPVOA, but you will get ATS1, which ATS1's primary function is emergency lighting throughout the south tower and receps and anything else emergency related in the south tower. Okay, this is panel HB, which also is a 277 480 volt panel. This panel's primary and only function is to feed HCPH, which is exactly on the other side of the wall, which that panel is your mechanical. That panel will feed your chillers, your pumps, anything to do with your HVAC. So that's all this panel's primary function is, and it is not an emergency. Okay, this panel here is VOB. Its primary function and only function is to feed DPVOB, which is right next door. That's all this panel does. This is the only piece of switchgear that we have out here that's 12208. Everything else in this room is 277 480 volt. This DPVOB has three breakers, distribution breakers. And what they do, you have DPVO1, DPVO2, and DPVO3. Each one of these breakers will feed a distribution panel throughout the south tower. DPVO1 will go to level 5. DPVO2 will go to level 8. And DPVO3 will go to level 11. Those will feed distribution panels on them floors, will feed all the apartment panels on each floor. And that's all this primary function is with this panel. All right, this is panel MDP. MDP's primary function is the parking garage. This panel feeds everything in the parking garage, all your lighting, receps, air fans, anything to do in the parking garage. Okay, you have electrical room on 100. This 100 amp breaker feeds. You have an electrical room on 200 and one on 300 as well. These breakers will feed 270. They'll feed 277 480 volts out to a transformer. Then you'll feed on the other side of it. You'll have your 120 208. This breaker up here is ATS4. ATS4's primary function is all the lighting throughout the parking garage, from level 50 up to level 5. This is your main breaker coming from the transformer yard. Okay, this is panel K1. This is a house panel. Its primary function is to feed the kitchen equipment on level 50, the level below. It's normal power. There's no emergency involved here. It's 12208. That's it. Feeds kitchen equipment. Panel HPH, which this panel is fed from HCPH, which is in the chiller room. Your main breaker for this panel. This panel here will feed fan coil units, air handler units, and exhaust fans on this floor and in the mechanical room. This also 225 amp breaker, HPL1. This will feed power into the pool electrical room 152. And that's all this panel does. All right, HPL is fed from HPH right next door. This is your 120 208 side. And this primarily just feeds receptacles, low voltage exhaust fans, and other things of that nature on this floor. And down on level 50 as well. This is HEDP. This panel is 100% generated power when it's fed from ATS2. It's 1000 amp ATS. This breaker here, HEDP1, feeds the North Tower electrical room 212. This does all your elevator equipment rooms and anything to do with emergency power and elevators in the North Tower. This breaker feeds HEPH, which is right next to this panel. This breaker feeds your jockey pump, and this breaker feeds your booster pump. Okay. This is a 277 40 volt panel. All right, panel HED, which is fed from HECPH. You have a 125, which feeds over to electrical room 152, which is at the pool, on the pool deck, emergency power. And then you have the 60 amp breaker here that feeds this panel right next door, KE1. That's all this panel does. KE1 is kitchen equipment, all emergency power for kitchen equipment, walk-in coolers, freezers, things of that nature. Anything emergency power in the kitchen, this panel takes care of. Primarily on level 50. All right, so we have HEPH, 277 40 volt panel, which is fed from HEDP. This panel feeds fan coil units, jockey pumps, and other things of that nature. Supply fans, kitchen exhaust fans, and it also feeds the panel right next to it, HEPL, which feeds receptacles and lighting, things of that nature on this floor in this area.